Hi, welcome to Forward Community Church Children's Ministries. Today we're talking about the story of Daniel in the Lion's Den, one of everybody's favorite Bible stories. This took place in the time of the exile, kind of towards the end of the Old Testament. There's not a lot of the Old Testament left after this. Daniel was a man who was taken to Babylon as a young man, and then he was trained to be a wise man. This king, King Darius, is a king that came after King Nebuchadnezzar. Darius was the new king of Babylon. He was smart, and he picked 120 of the very best people in his kingdom to help him rule. Then he picked 3 of them to be in charge. Daniel was one of those 3 men. King Darius respected Daniel so much, he thought about making him ruler over the whole kingdom. One unfortunate thing about people is that whenever somebody is successful, people are often jealous of them. Daniel was faithful and he did a good job. He studied hard and he learned, and God was with him. He was faithful to God and God blessed him, and he was very successful. He was one of the top 4 people in the kingdom. There was the king, and then there were his 3 main advisors, which Daniel was one. And whenever you're in that kind of position, you often make enemies. Whether you did anything or not, those enemies are looking to get rid of you so that, out of jealousy, they can take your place. The other leaders were jealous. They planned to find some fault in Daniel so they could get Daniel in trouble with the king. No matter how they tried, these leaders couldn't find anything bad about Daniel. Daniel was true to the king in all that he did. Also, he was careful and clever and always did everything the very best he could. Daniel was faithful and he took his duties seriously. Unfortunately, a lot of leaders tend to do things like stealing money, embezzling stuff. They're not faithful in what they do, but with Daniel, he was careful. If the king gave him some money to do something with, he was careful in how he administered that. He was working as if he was working for God, which is one thing the Bible instructs us to. But the people couldn't find anything wrong with him, and they wanted to get Daniel. The jealous leaders knew there was only one way they could trap Daniel. They knew that nothing on earth would stop him from worshiping the God of Israel. Daniel's enemies thought up a plan. They made a new law for the king to sign. The law said that everyone should pray only to King Darius. Anyone who disobeyed would be thrown into a den of lions. So they looked at Daniel. They said, okay, this guy's like too perfect, but his one perfect thing is that he only worships his God. So let's trick the king into signing a law that says that everybody has to worship the king. Now the king, he was like, yeah, that sounds great. Everybody can worship me. I'm big and powerful, the king of the most powerful kingdom on earth. Of course they should worship me. And they had a tradition, a law in those days, that once the king signed a law into effect, that he couldn't just go back and change that law. The new law made no difference to Daniel. He did what he always did. He kneeled by his open window 3 times a day and prayed to the God of heaven. So Daniel refused to pray to the king, as the law said, because he obeyed a higher law, the law of God. So he continued praying to God, just like he'd always done. The jealous leaders rushed to tell the king. King Darius had no choice but to arrest Daniel. The law had to be obeyed. Daniel had to die. The king tried hard, but he couldn't find a way to change the law. At this point, the king realized that he'd made a mistake, that he'd been tricked, but he'd already signed the law. And remember, it couldn't be changed. So he had to obey the law just like everybody else. He couldn't make an exception for Daniel, even though he liked him. And even though he was one of his close advisors and he was a faithful man, the law said he had to do this. Daniel was sentenced to die by being put into a den of lions. Before Daniel was thrown to the hungry lions, King Darius said to him, "Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you." The king didn't sleep that night. Very early the next morning, he rushed back to the lion's pit. King Darius shouted out, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Maybe he didn't expect an answer, but Daniel replied. Daniel called out, "O king, my God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so that they have not hurt me. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you." King Darius was delighted. He ordered Daniel to be lifted out of the pit. So the law said that if someone didn't pray to the king or prayed to someone else besides the king, then they were to be thrown into the pit of lions, into the den of lions. If they were thrown in there, then of course the lions would kill them and eat them. God sent an angel and protected Daniel there. He spent the whole night surrounded by vicious man-eating beasts, and they didn't harm him. Just to kind of prove how hungry the lions are, watch what happens next. The king knew God had delivered Daniel and that Daniel's enemies were God's enemies. He gave a command, and all those who tricked him to sign the bad law were thrown into the lion's den. The lions ate them. The Bible tells us that they didn't even reach the ground. The lions were so hungry and vicious that when they threw them in, the lions caught them out of the air and killed them. The lions were very hungry. It definitely wasn't that they weren't hungry why they didn't eat Daniel. It's that God was protecting him. King Darius wanted the world to know that the God of heaven had protected his faithful servant Daniel. He wrote a letter that commanded everybody to worship the living God, and the king restored Daniel to honor and leadership. Babylon often kind of represents everything that is wrong and evil in a way. Like they worshipped foreign gods. That's all they did. It was just completely alien to the worship of the one true God. And yet here God is in the midst of this, using his servants to show king after king that the one true God is the one who has the power. He is the God over heaven and earth. He raises up kings and takes down kings. Just like Daniel, our job is to be faithful to the one who is the one true God. Well, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. God bless.